Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Must Love Books. Welcome back to Must Love Books podcast. And today I have a very special episode for you because this episode is cursed. And we will get into that in just a moment. But first, I would like to introduce a very special guest today. Sangu Mandanna, author of A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I laughed when you said the episode is cursed because it really is. I mean, I'll let you tell the story, but yeah, it's been ridiculous. But yes, hi, I'm Sangu. I wrote A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping and The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, among other fantasy books. I live in the UK, in England, and I'm currently sitting here in my pajamas thinking about how lucky I am that I get to do this job in my pajamas.
In the pajamas is kind of the key takeaway there.
That's the important part. Yeah. I mean,
Absolutely.
if I never needed to change, I'd be happy. Yeah.
Pajamas are the best. I
Yeah.
also work in my pajamas often. It's the real life there. When I say this episode is cursed, I really do mean it because Sangu and I have been talking since before Must Love Books podcast even aired. One of the very first people that I talked to about hosting on this podcast, and here we are, a year and a half later, finally able to record because it was always just one thing after another. Part of it is the publishing industry can, switch things around on you. So publishing dates got pushed around, and then scheduling of events and stuff would get in the way. And then it's like, oh, well, today there's a storm. And then today, hey, my train is late. And it was just one thing after another. And we both decided that it was kind of actually perfect for the theme of this book.
Yeah, it is very apt. It's almost like I mean I don't want to go so far as to say that, there is actually a curse on us, but it does feel a little bit like the magic of the book seeped out and messed around with us a little bit.
Little mischievous aura there. So let's go ahead and talk about A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping.
Yay. So, A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. Wow. I mean, I am so proud of this book. I love it so much. Which is funny to say because it was really hard to write. It's a cozy romantic fantasy about a young witch who is incredibly powerful, resurrects her great aunt from the dead, loses most of her magic, and 15 years later is still trying to figure out who she is without this essential part of her. And then she discovers there might be a way to get her magic back, but she needs a hot, grumpy man's help, as one does. And it kind of all kicks off from there.
Well, of course, a hot but grumpy
Hmm.
magical historian to come and assist, which is, I mean, I feel like that's a trope there on its own.
Yeah, it should be a thing. I think like hot, grumpy magical historians should be more of a thing. Yeah. And I'm biased.
Absolutely. Like, let's have more of this because I'm down. I'm here for it.
Yeah. And I think that, we're kind of in an era of academia being popular. And so, you combine that cozy fantasy with some academia, with a magical historian. I mean, it's perfect. This is sort of like, again, totally like going off track here, but there is India Holton's new series is a cozy fantasy about academia, just for anyone who, like me, enjoys putting those two things together.
I love it. Always here for a good book rec. So let's talk about writing A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. You said that this was a particularly challenging novel for you to complete. And so why was that?
There were a lot of reasons, I think. This is a weird thing to say because A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping is my 10th published novel, but I feel like I had serious second book syndrome when I was writing this book. It was my second adult novel, my second cozy fantasy. And just purely on, I don't like to kind of be like, some of my books are better than others because I don't think that's true. I think I put all that I can into all my books. But in terms of sort of numbers and objective kind of success, and I'm sort of air quoting success here, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches was by far my most successful book. And so following that up with an unrelated but similar book felt like a huge amount of pressure. Now, the right thing to do, the right answer, the easy answer would obviously have been to finish the book before the Irregular Witches came out, but that just didn't happen. So once sort of the hype grew and I was kind of sitting there going, how am I ever going to live up to that? And it's a lot. And then just completely out of the blue, I don't think there's any real explanation for how this happens. I got COVID again, and it was my third time getting COVID, but and the first two times weren't great, but I kind of, you bounce back. And this time I just didn't. It wasn't until a while later that, we learned it was long COVID, but it was just a year of feeling rough. It's hard to describe now because I feel like I'm mostly out of it, but I feel like 2024 was kind of a black hole. I look back at that year and I think I'm not convinced I know what was happening. What was I doing? I couldn't really pinpoint anything that I did specifically because it feels like that whole year sort of disappeared. So yeah, there were a lot of reasons, and it was a hard book to write. And I think the other thing about this book was that it took me a long time to figure out what its soul was. It was like a part of me knew, but I couldn't quite articulate it onto the page until I was sort of on draft three, and I kind of narrowed in on the fact that what the soul of this book really was, in addition to like the found family and that sense of welcome and belonging at a magical inn, what it was about fundamentally was about somebody struggling with mental health, with change, with the sort of, well, literally and metaphorically, the ghosts of all the versions of herself that she used to be. And while it was great to kind of finally figure that out, to be able to put that into words that could translate onto the page, it was also hard because so much of it mirrored what I'd been going through for a long time. It is, in a lot of ways, my most personal book. And as rewarding as that is, it's also incredibly difficult to do because you are putting a lot. Again, I put a lot of myself into every book, but with this one, it felt like more.
And, writing a story that is all about, at its core, reclaiming lost power and reclaiming a aspect of who you are. I mean, that has to be such a vulnerable process as the author to really
Yeah,
get deep into those emotions and those feelings. And you put all authors put themselves into their books, so putting yourself on that journey of finding your voice and reclaiming your power, that's got to be kind of an emotional process.
absolutely. Yeah. And, yeah, all authors do put a lot of themselves into their books. And I do put a lot of myself into all of my books. And in different ways, they all kind of make me feel vulnerable. But yeah, but like I said, this one, I think, just asked for more from me. And I gave it more. And in so many ways, so much of it feels so personal to me, and just not just in Sarah's journey and just the people around her, in the side characters and who they are and how they sort of are inspired by or reflect people I love. And it's so personal. And so it does, in a lot of ways, it does feel with this book in particular that I kind of literally put my heart on my sleeve. And I didn't literally do that, obviously.
Literally in the figurative sense.
Literally in the figurative sense, exactly. But it did feel very much like exposing this huge gaping wound, and also good things as well. But yeah, it is a very, very vulnerable process in general, and with this one in particular.
Inspired you to write this story?
Where did I begin? I always have a hard time answering this question, specifically because my writing process tends to be a bunch of different stuff kind of comes together at the right time, and I think, ooh, that's a story. So it's very rarely just one thing. For example, before I wrote The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, I wrote a space opera trilogy inspired by Indian mythology. And it doesn't really make sense when you think about it, it's Indian mythology, but also set in space. What's happening? And the only reason that happened, I think, is because I'd been wanting to write this story, this sort of retelling of Indian mythology, of this specific epic for a long time, but I couldn't figure out a way to do it that felt both exciting and new, but also true to me. And then at the same time, sort of like a little while later, rather, my 3-year-old became obsessed with space and started to talk to me about all these things and planets and comets. And it was like the two things just smooshed together. And I was like, there's a story. So when I was writing A Witch's Guide to Magical, I started out with the process. The difference between this and a lot of my other books was that with this one, I kind of had a very rough blueprint. I knew that it was going to be another cozy, witchy, romantic fantasy. So I had those parameters, but I didn't necessarily know what it was going to be about because they are parameters, but they're open enough. They're loose, they're vague. You can do a lot of things with that. And then I thought of like just a magical inn, a place that makes you feel like you're welcome, a place where anybody, especially people who are having a hard time fitting in anywhere else, find a place they can be. And that kind of smooshed together with a trip I took to the Lake District in Lancashire. Well, the Lake District is in Cumbria, which is just sort of north of Lancashire. But I spent a few years living in Lancaster when I was younger, and so that part of the country is really nostalgic to me. And I was like, we could set it here. And then a lot of things just sort of spiraled together. And I knew I wanted to tell this story about somebody who has lost magic, who is up against this extremely, what's a nice, polite way to put it? All boys club. Let's put it that way. She's up against like the magical guild in this book that sort of oversees all the witches in the country is very much an all boys club. The vast majority of the people who have power in the guild are straight white men and straight rich white men. I mean, that wasn't an accident. I think we are very much living in an era where straight white rich men sort of fail upward, and the rest of us have to fight that much harder to even get a scrap of what's left behind. And so I feel like I really wanted to tell the story about this young girl, a young girl of color, no less, who is incredibly powerful and resented by this magical world because she has power and they don't think she deserves it. I mean, what's she done? She's wrong in every possible way. She's a girl. She's brown. This is very much their thought. I think that's the thing, that it's a very polite veneer. And so they would never go outright be like, oh, yeah, but they very much kind of lean into this sense of, but why? And there's sort of this one extremely old member of the Old Boys Club who actually says some of these things out loud. Because isn't there always?
Yes.
And and so I feel like it was important to me to tell that story and about how she fights to reclaim her power and how power can take different forms. And sometimes it's magical power, sometimes it's like the literal sense of having control over something big. Sometimes it's about being able to recognize that the greatest power you can have is being able to kind of determine the course of your own life on your own terms. And it was just a lot of things that meant a lot to me, I think. All wrapped up. I feel like I should add, all wrapped up in what I very much hope is a warm, whimsical, silly world.
I think there's a really important message for readers to connect to, relate to, and ultimately learn from in reclaiming not just her actual magic in the physical sense, the literal sense, but reclaiming her power from this oppressive, stodgy group
Mm.
of old straight white dudes.
Yes. Yes. So, I mean, without getting too spoilery, there's a lot of different kinds of power. There's definitely a sense of, with or without magic, there is a way to reclaim the power that other people have taken from you by being able to say, this is how I choose to live my life. This is the way I choose to do things. And I choose to be welcoming and kind and brave and to defend against these oppressive forces that want to, at a minimum, change us and at worst, destroy us. I think all fantasy kind of has that metaphorical, allegorical kind of link to reality. And I think probably the relatable part is not so much, can I get this enormous amount of magic back? But do I get to choose the course of my own life? Do I get to choose what I'm going to be and what kind of life I'm going to live? Or are far more powerful people going to come at me to stop that from happening? And I don't necessarily think that in the real world there's an easy answer. Obviously, we know what the right answer is, but I don't think there's an easy one. So yeah, there is a lot of different kinds of power and a different ways to reclaim it.
You're
True.
absolutely right because there are so many different forms of power. There's your personal power and your voice, there's political power, there's,
Yeah.
in the fantasy world, of course, her magical power, but that
Hmm.
is a symbol of her personal power and her voice and her connection to her community, all of which are different forms of power
Hmm.
that you can take control of or others can try to take from you.
Yes, and they do.
And they
And
do. And
they,
it's something that
and
we
yeah.
absolutely see in our real world because books parallel the real world, whether we intend them to or not. And of course, in this
Yeah.
case, I'd say that the intention is there.
I did intend it to, but yeah, you're absolutely right, whether we plan to or not. And this is why I kind of get really worked up over the whole art versus the artist argument, because as an artist and as somebody who has been writing since I was very, very young, like we're talking almost 30 years now, of putting things onto paper. And I can say from experience and from, all the many authors I know and the books I've read, that the artist is the art and the art is the artist. There is absolutely no way to separate them. Now, this is not to say that just because a writer writes something, I mean, this is not me saying that every thriller writer is secretly a serial killer. Obviously not. But it's more that their political views, what they value, what matters to them, will come across in the book, whether that book is about a witch at a magical inn or about a serial killer in Georgia. I mean, I'm just picking something like random here. But it is impossible. And while I think as readers who have a lot of love for books that hold a lot of nostalgia in our hearts, we sometimes want to cling to the idea that the art is not the same as the artist. I think they are.
They absolutely are. Because even if it's not a intentional, purposeful thought, the way that you as a artist, you as an author, as a writer, see the world is
Mhm.
going to bleed through onto paper because your
Yes.
view is going to be seen in the worldview of your characters and your
Yeah.
setting and the plot points that happen and how the characters react to certain things. These are all going to, hint at different aspects of the author's worldview. So, yeah, as you said it, and you said it absolutely perfectly in probably the most concise way I've heard it said, the art is the artist and the artist is the art. Absolutely.
And the thing is, that's a good thing. There's so much to be proud of in knowing that you leave behind a piece of who you really are as a legacy when you are an artist. And I think it almost takes away from that to say that, well, it's not actually us. It's just a thing we did. I mean, it's just not realistic and not particularly respectful of all the art that's out there.
Yeah, I think that push for separating the art from the artist and the way that you just said it perfectly about, oh, it's not a piece of me, it's just this thing I made. I think that mindset is kind of what is helping drive the push for those who are supporting AI generated art
Hmm.
because there's no emotion there. There's no part of your
Yeah.
soul into that work. It's just a thing that was created. Now, of course, it's created by stealing from other artists across the
Yes.
board. But, those who are supporting AI art aren't really fully understanding that
The
aspect
thing
of
is that there's
it.
a lot of disingenuous arguments that come out of it as well. Things like, okay, but all art is about stealing from other artists. We're all inspired by other people. Yeah, and that's why there's a difference between inspiration and influence and plagiarism. Generative AI absolutely crosses the line into the latter. It's not a valid argument in my opinion. But the thing is, I have heard arguments that I can sympathize with. Absolutely. I've heard arguments like for disabled people, it's easier. It probably is. But I also think that that is insulting to a lot of disabled artists. I am. It is harder. I have ADHD, I have OCD, I have depression, I had COVID. These are all things that made it much harder for me and continue to make it harder for me to write a book than, say, somebody who is not depressed, doesn't have ADHD, and is able to kind of, tackle it full swing, disciplined, kind of get in there and get their 5,000 words done every single day like clockwork. I have no doubt that that might be easier, but that doesn't mean it's impossible or that it's okay to use a tool like that to make things easier for yourself. And I think it's an argument I sympathize with, but that I don't agree with. And yeah, it's just like you said, it is a fundamental, because that's the thing, the work that comes out of generative AI, we have seen it. We have seen what it comes out to. And like I think right now the phrase AI slop is, popular and well used for, good reason. But even if you sort of try and step back a bit and say, okay, objectively, maybe some of it's not slop. At a bare minimum, it is just absent of any soul. There is nothing true coming out of it because how can there be? It's a machine. The human part of it has been stripped away. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of that kind of art versus artist, that sort of, I don't have to put myself in. I can just generate something because that way I can churn out a book in a week. There are writers out there who can write a first draft in a week. That doesn't mean it's a good book. I think anyone will tell you that probably if they've written their first draft in a week, they then want to spend some time editing it and making it better. And also, even so, it's still something that they wrote. They put themselves into it. I feel like I'm going on like an AI rant here, but it steals. It strips away humanity. And, even when you set aside all of that, just running them is destroying communities and destroying the planet. But why? Why are
The
we
amount
doing
of
this?
water that is wasted
I know. It's just,
just by hosting AI
yeah.
servers is absolutely wild. I mean, that right there, even outside of the art argument, the
Mhm.
environmental impact
Yeah.
is devastating. And
And
that
there,
right there, like, even if people weren't using it to steal art and create their new quote unquote art to then, sell or whatever it is that they're doing with it, even if that was not happening, the environmental impact is just going to destroy, as you said, communities. It's going to destroy environmental areas. It's stealing water that we have so many
we
other uses
literally
for.
need.
We literally need this,
Yeah.
and we're going to use it to cool off computers instead.
At the end of the day, we're not using it to cool off computers so that every single person who uses AI can have a better life. We're using it to cool off computers so that a few people can make even more money than they've already got. It's in every possible way. It's such a mess.
Absolutely. So, long story short, AI is bad.
Yeah,
In case
very
anyone was wondering. So I'm going to take it back a little bit here for a moment. And I want to ask you about your writing process. And did you change any of your writing process when tackling A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping because it was such a more challenging writing experience for you?
I had to because it was, more challenging, but not just in the sense that I felt more vulnerable. I mean, I think if it had been just that, I probably wouldn't have had to change my process much because, as I said, it's kind of like every book sort of peels apart the layers a little bit and exposes me. But I think with this one, And this is, what I was talking about earlier, where you have to make modifications for yourself when you're struggling with either a temporary or a permanent disability. The nature of the long COVID meant that on a very practical level, I could maybe sit at my laptop for half an hour, looking at the screen, get a bit, whatever work I could get done in about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes on a good day, and then I was out. Like, I wasn't sitting there going, you know what, I'm bored now, or you know what, I'm feeling a bit tired. No, I was literally, it was half an hour to 45 minutes of looking at that screen, using the sort of mental brain power that writing a book uses. That was all I could do. And it was an absolute shock at the start because even though since I had kids, I have gotten used to kind of gradually writing for smaller stretches of time, less over the course of the day. I was still a person who could, on a good day, get, a few thousand words done, a few hours at a time. And I was just horrified. There was a part of me that was terrified that that was never going to change. And another part that was just what was happening. And I did have to change the process because a lot of my writing process before this book involves, I think it's the ADHD, it involves kind of like hyper fixating and kind of getting into the zone and then not allowing myself to get out of the zone. The thing with ADHD combined with creativity is if you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it. There is nothing you can do to force yourself to feel it. So you can do things like admin, you can do things like copy edits, you can do things that are more sort of, that don't require as much creativity. You can get that side of your work done. But the creative part, you need to be able to get into the zone. And when the zone feels rare, you don't want to let yourself out of it. And I physically couldn't. It was like my brain would just shut down and I could feel that I wanted to sleep or that I was just about, like, I had a really bad headache from looking at the screens and I just wanted to go back to bed. And I had to learn to readjust my process so that I could work in those short stints. And then when I put the laptop away, laid down for a little bit, kind of like waited for the headache to go, just kind of get on my phone or on a notebook and scribble down what else, like the other things that were in my head while I still had a little bit of that hyperfixation kind of creativity. I will say that what probably saved the whole process for me was that at the time I was working on a third draft, which meant that a lot of the sort of the structure was already there. I don't know how I would have done the whole thing um, if it had been drafting from scratch. Probably much slower. I think that's the reality of it. When you can only do half an hour at a time, maybe twice a day, that's an hour of creative work a day. That's not going to write a book very quickly. But I physically could not and mentally could not achieve more than that. And it's one of those things that on the one hand you're kind of embarrassed and ashamed about because you think this is my job. This isn't how I'm supposed to function. And I think I've reached a point now where I recognize that you can't help that. Mental health, physical health, these are not things within our control by and large. COVID, it went long COVID, a depressive episode. You don't get to choose when this happens or how it happens, and you have to adapt. And so with this, I did very much have to just accept that I was going to work a lot slower, accept that the publishing date was going to have to move, and accept that the process would have to change and that I couldn't rely on those sort of hyperfixation frenzies anymore, at least not at the time. I think I'm able to get back to them now, but it's not the way it used to be. I'm still kind of slower and quicker to tire than I was before long COVID.
The hyperfixation is certainly something that I can relate to because when you're not feeling it, you can't do it. There's
I
just
mean, it
nothing that can
yeah,
force you to do it.
I think it's one of those things that, and I could totally get it, that people who don't have ADHD just simply cannot wrap their heads around. Like it's literally like, well, you know that you need to do the dishes. You know that it needs to be done. You literally cannot eat again without doing the dishes. You know it needs to be done. You also know that you need to put your clothes away. And you also know that you have this 5-minute form to fill out. That's all it'll take. And yet you cannot physically or mentally make yourself get off the sofa and stop scrolling on your phone to do it. And it's this complete disconnect between what you know you have to do and what you're constantly thinking about needing to do and actually doing it. And it boggles the brain of anybody who doesn't quite get what it's like to live in that space. And sometimes not even as simple as hyperfixation. Like that's the other end of the spectrum. The more kind of the opposite side
The
is
inverse,
just that,
yeah.
yes, the
The
complete,
executive dysfunction.
yeah, of just sitting there not being able to move. And it makes no sense. And yet there you are.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I have experienced and absolutely relate to. Okay, so I did have a question I wanted to ask you, as you have now written a couple different witchy stories for us. If you could have any sort of witch power in your real day-to-day life, what would it be and why?
There are so many fun and cool things that would be great to have. Like a spell to be able to just whip up like a tea that could do something. Like in the very secret society of irregular witches, Mika makes tea potions, which are just these delicious teas that can do magical things like, make you instantly feel and be luckier. Just basically the things that a lot of real teas can do, but just much, much more intense and more complete. And that would be cool. Or, flying a literal broomstick and flying around. Like that would be so cool. But, I feel like if I were really honest and practical, the kind of power I would probably want is just the mundane Mary Poppins-y stuff like, snap your fingers and your clothes are all put away.
Right?
Like domestic chores, I want them to be sorted by magic. Like that is what I would want. Or alternatively, and honestly, I don't know how I would, if I had to choose between these two, I don't know if I could. Like the ability to just keep all bugs and critters out of my
Mm,
house.
yes, just out of the house, like put a barrier
Yeah, I wish them
around
no
the
harm.
house.
I
Like
just do
just
not
you
want
just
them in
can't
my
go on my
space.
property. You just
Yeah,
have to find another
yeah.
area to go.
Just live
Yes.
happily elsewhere.
Yes.
Yeah, that's me. That
Two
one or
very
the other,
important
or both.
powers.
The two magical powers I would like. I wouldn't be a very good superhero, but I would have a very nice house.
Yes. I have to agree with you on that. Absolutely. The fictional witchcraft for mundane household things and the way that it could just greatly improve your quality of life by
I mean,
never having
honestly,
to see a bug or wash a dish ever again.
just game changer. You could argue there are dishwashers. Absolutely, but you have to load them and unload them. This is what magic would do. This magic would make it so that I would have to do none of these domestic chores, and instead I could, focus on writing more books or playing video games or reading. Reading!
Yes.
I almost never have time to just kind of sit and read a book just for fun anymore, which is, again, the nature of the job. But
My TBR grows far faster than I can ever get through it,
oh,
which is
yeah.
very
I mean,
sad.
I made peace a long time ago with the fact that I would always want to read more books than I would ever actually get to read. That I would never live long enough to read every single book I want to read. I've made peace with that, but I would like to read something every now and then. Like, I think purely for fun, I have read maybe 5 books this year, just for fun. Nothing to do with work, nothing to do with like research or other authors, events, or nothing work related, purely because I thought this looks fun, I will read it. Maybe 5 books. And the thing is, this is not to say that I haven't really enjoyed or sometimes outright loved some of the books that I have read
Yes, it's just
through
more of an
work or for
assignment.
work. It is. It's just more that like I didn't necessarily choose them and read and I was always mindful at the time that I was reading them to a deadline or for a reason. Let me see, what did I read? There's been a couple of rereads. I reread purely for fun the 10th Princess Diaries book. So there were 10 in the original series. Go into
Instantly.
a little bit of a Princess Diaries deep dive here, just a little one. There were 10 in the original series in which Mia kind of goes from, I think, 4 to 18 and kind of has a little story arc. And then several years after that, there was a new book in which she's 25. And that's the one I reread. Like she's an adult, there's adult things, like, she's still writing her diary, but, she's dealing with more adult stuff. And it's very nostalgic and really fun. And so I reread that. And what else did I actually read for fun? I think I read a Karen Slaughter, which is probably why what came to mind earlier when I was talking about thrillers was a serial killer in Georgia. I
That
feel
makes
like
sense.
all Karen Slaughter's books are serial killers in Georgia. I think there was one of those.
I feel that a lot of my reading lately has been ARC copies for
Yes.
different authors on my podcast. So, and although I have loved literally every single one I have read, it is different when it is something that you get to choose on your own and just
Hmm.
not have a deadline for, not have to, take some notes for
Yes.
an interview, just something that you choose on your own to just either listen to or read or
Yeah.
just enjoy without
Yes,
any
exactly.
expectations.
Literally just kind of wallow in it and then set it aside like nothing else. Nothing else is asked of you except to simply
Yes,
experience
just
it.
like the normies get to do.
Yes, very much so.
So, Sangu, I want to thank you so much for finally joining me today on Must Love Books podcast. It has been a bit of a ride for us to get here, but we have
Mhm.
finally done it just in time for spooky season, a great witchy rom-com for us to dive into this fall. And I'm just really excited for the listeners to pick up a copy. So I think everyone will really enjoy it. And thank you again for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Like you said, I'm so glad we were finally able to do this. And yeah, it's just been so much fun talking to you.
It truly has been great. I always have so much fun with all of my authors, but when we've spent a while trying to get here, it just kind of feels like getting to connect with an old friend after a while, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I really, really enjoyed this.
So did I. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening. This has been Must Love Books. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon under at Must Love Books Podcast. Thank you and happy reading.